in this game between Korchnoi and Matanovic, well, what can we say? White has just played the move queen to e2, and we notice that he has a little bit more space. This pawn on d4, even if exchanged, perhaps white can voluntarily accept an IQP, an isolated queen's pawn position, and with all of the minor pieces on the board, it may be a respectable IQP choice. Black instead crafted a plan which involved giving up the bishop pair. He played the move bishop to c6, white now played rook to d1, and after queen e7 he went bishop to d2. Here the idea is that black wants the c6 square for his knight. That's the normal square, but the bishop is posted there right now, so bishop takes f3 is why I said that after bishop to c6, this was already crafting this idea to give up the bishop pair. Queen takes f3 and now knight to c6. And it's a little bit, reminds us a little bit of that first game we examined. Black, once again, has comfortable development. He doesn't have a development advantage like in the last game, but he simply has very natural, harmonious development. His pieces are exerting pressure in the center of the board, which is always good. And the position is not so open right now that we can say that it's such a huge deal that the bishop pair has been conceded. Nevertheless, the same thing applies. Black must demonstrate something tangible, because if white is able to consolidate fully and subsequently open up the position a little bit, black is going to have trouble. D takes c5, queen takes c5, and now bishop to f1. I mean, I quite like the white position here. b4 is a very concrete threat right now, so black played queen e5, and g3. A clever idea by Korchnoi. The bishop is rerouting to this h1 to a8 diagonal, whereupon it will pressure c6 and b7. And, well, it will establish itself as a Catalan bishop of sorts, sometimes referred to as that because you fianchetto your bishop in the Catalan. So, okay, so g3, which is an opening seen very frequently at the highest levels. So after g3, rook f d8, and now rook a c1, we can see that white is more or less consolidated. He might need one more move, bishop to g2, and maybe resolve the slight pressure against this bishop. But he's pretty close to being fully having a harmonious position, and then he can enjoy the benefit of the bishop pair for free. He's free rolling, as we would say in such situations. Or, in fact, as we more typically say, white can be said to be playing for two results. The players are playing for two results. White will either win or black will draw. But with good play, symmetrical pawn structure, the only difference is the bishop pair, which is clearly in white's favor. So that's a risk-free advantage. Of course, nobody is immune from blundering, but with sensible play, it's very, very difficult for white to lose this position. And that actually is not so much just a tangent, but actually an important point to keep in mind. There are many players, I'm actually one of them, who try to gravitate towards positions where you have the bishop pair and you're trying to sort of claim that it's an advantage, but you understand that maybe the bishop pair advantage will be neutralized. But even if it is neutralized, so you get a draw. I mean, you get to play relatively conservative, risk-free chess and push for the win without too much risk. Okay, rook to d7, b4 was played, bishop to b6, and now a clever move, knight to a4. White goes after the second bishop, and after this he will establish the same two bishops versus two knights duel that we already saw. It's important to note once again that it's not necessary to achieve this in order to be said to have the advantage of the two bishops. So the distribution of bishop bishop versus knight knight, like we see here, or bishop bishop versus bishop knight, or bishop bishop knight versus bishop knight knight, right? These are the different options, and typically all of them give an advantage. However, if you have, let's say, the two bishops and a knight versus a bishop and two knights, most of the time that's going to represent a slightly lesser advantage. And one of the reasons why is because if the opponent still has one of his bishops left, as he has here, then he may try, and in some circumstances succeed, to exchange these two bishops and leave you without the bishop pair. But after knight a4, queen e4, queen takes, knight takes, bishop e1, rook takes, let's say, rook d8, rook takes d8, in this case knight takes d8 was played, and after, say, knight takes b6, a takes b6, we see that it's much more difficult for black to exchange off one of his minor pieces for one of white's and kill off the bishop pair. Whereas if this bishop was still on the board, you might imagine some situation where this exchange can occur. It's a good question. Why not simply bishop takes d8? The answer is that there's a concrete problem. Bishop takes d8 is what black would like to play, but after bishop g2, knight d6, let's say, then knight to c5, and the Catalan bishop, as we said, is exerting simply too much pressure on b7 and c6. And that is the unopposed bishop as well, which is very important to take note of which one of your two bishops has no counterpart, because that one will likely have the bigger pull over the course of the game. And well, other than knight to d6, the only alternative I can see is f5, but after bishop takes e4, f takes e4, knight c5, we see that once again, white has traded in his bishop pair advantage, but he's winning material. So, well, therefore, what can we say? After rook takes d1, rook takes d1, rook d8, rook takes d8, knight takes d8 was played, knight takes b6, a takes b6, and finally we arrive at that 2 bishops versus 2 knights endgame. In my view, black's defensive task is already too great, because black also is dealing with a bad pawn structure. So I think it's too much. Let's see how things unfolded. f3, knight d6, b5. Notice again that strategy, first kicking away the knight from its central post, now playing b5, which not only fixes these pawns here, especially the pawn on b6 is a major concern, but also b7 at some point in the future might be a serious concern. And the other benefit of b5 is that this knight is left unable to move. King f8, bishop to c3, eyeing up the possibility of driving that bishop to d4 and asking the question of black. f6 is played to try and neutralize the influence of this bishop. Bishop to d3, h6, bishop to b4, king e7, and f4. King d7, e4. White is simply advancing his pawns and trying to grab some space, assisted by the effective bishops. Knight 8 to f7, king f2, and notice how well these two pawns are working together. This knight here on d6 does not have the option of f5. There is no possibility of driving either of the knights to d5, as that square is also covered. And we finally notice that the squares of e5 and g5 are all covered. So between these pawns, all of these central squares are covered, and the black knights are very ineffective. Black played the move g6. Also, we note the same relationship here. Two squares in between along either rank or file. And notice how this knight simply has no options available, no forward jumps. Black played the move g6. And here white chose to sharpen up the position. He played the move e5. That's an interesting move and a good move. In general, as the position opens up, bishops will gain in strength, while the shorter range knights will have more difficulty maneuvering quickly enough. So that enhanced mobility of the bishops is why in general we can say that bishops do prefer those positions where there are pawns on all areas of the board, while knights tend to gain in strength when the fight is taking place only on one side. So f takes e5, bishop takes g6, e takes f4, g takes f4, and now black played the move e5. So it's understandable that black wishes to liquidate and hoping that the reduced material will give him greater holding chances. However, this was the wrong decision. Some move like knight h8, it's a very sad looking move, but such a move would have been best. Try and not open up the position and, kick the bishop away, and then on the next move just return and put the ball in white's court and see how he intends on making progress. Nevertheless, that should be lost, but at least it was a tougher fight. e5 cracks open the position and, importantly, also allowed a very concrete line. Bishop takes f7 would have been the best move, giving up the bishop pair, but after knight takes f7, f5 is the point. This is an outside pass pawn. Notice the beautiful placement of this bishop on b4, covering the f8 square. So the bishop and the pawn are combining very well. And white's idea is simply to drive the king up the board and at some point just pick up the pawn on e5 and win like this. It's worth noting before we take a look at that a move such as knight d6 is no good. Bishop takes d6, king takes d6, king e3. And, this is why we need to know our king and pawn endgames, because this position is absolutely winning for white. King d5, a4, e4, f6, king e6, king takes, king d5, king e7, and king e5. And I think we don't need to look at anything further. White has the opposition and a more active king. And either by going to the queen side or going to the king side, he will be able to win the pawn race quite easily and convert. So therefore, because knight d6 is not an option, black would have to choose an alternative like h5. And notice how well these pawns are working with the bishop to restrict the black king. There's no option of c6 or e6. And there's also no option of d6. So the king is very much restricted. The knight is very restricted as well because of the problematic ensuing king and pawn endgame. This pawn was on h6, so it couldn't have gone here either. Now it can at least move, but it's too late. King e3, knight h6, king e4, knight g4, and now just saving the h pawn, h4, king c7, king d5, king d7, a4, and black is actually, funnily enough, in zugzwang, because if he moves the knight, this pawn will fall, and if he moves the king, say to c7, then the white king is making its way up the board further, and after king d8, simply f6. That pawn will cost black his knight, as otherwise it cannot be stopped. Notice also just how incredibly well placed this bishop on b4 is, not only controlling the f8 square, but also controlling the e1 square just in case. It's probably not necessary, but just in case, controlling the promotion square for the black pawn as well as the promotion square for the white pawn. And that is something that a knight can never do, simply because it's a shorter range piece. So therefore, bishop takes f7 was already a forcing win. However, white played the move king to f3, which is also good and the safer, more natural human choice. Black played king to e6, and now white defended the pawn on b5. Black went king to d5, and now white went h4. King to e6 and bishop to c2. One of the problems of having two knights can arise even in openings is that the knights can step on each other's toes quite frequently. So here we see that the two knights are potentially competing for the same squares. This knight may potentially wish to go to d6, and this knight on d6 may potentially wish to go to f7. And that's a problem you're never going to have with the bishop pair, simply because this will always maneuver only on the light squares, and this will always maneuver only on the dark. Knight went to f5, bishop b3 check, king f6, and now f takes e5 check, a well-timed f takes e5, knight takes e5, and a very nice square for the king. Obviously, in these situations, we should always be very careful. Do not blunder into forks, right? So knights are very, very tricky. But after the move king to e4, the king is perfectly well placed. This knight cannot give a check, and a check such as g3 will only invite the king further up the board. Black chose in this position, he could have attempted to stay defensive with a move like knight d7, but it would not have been good enough. Bishop c3 check, king g6, h5 check, king g5. Of course, the pawn cannot be captured because if black captures the pawn, the knight is falling, so this is all forced. Bishop d2 check, king f6, all forced, and now simple move king f4, again sidestepping those forks. King f4, the threat here is bishop c3 now that there will be no king g5 response, so bishop c3 would pick up this knight. And once again, let's assume that we played a move such as knight e7, then bishop c3 check, and we see the same pattern that we saw unfold before. Knight e5 only move, and bishop takes e5 is checkmate. So that offensive power of the bishop pair is on display. Therefore, after king f4, let's say knight d6, bishop c3 check, king e7, and once again that quick change of pace, bishop g7. White on the one hand was toying with this possibility of checkmating the opponent, or was toying earlier with the possibility of winning these queenside pawns, or one of them at least. And now all of a sudden, what is actually costing black the game is the pawn on h6. So yeah, the principle of two weaknesses is also at play here, where black simply has too many weaknesses. The pawns on b7 and b6 and h6 are all weaknesses. If black only had one weakness to deal with, it may be possible for him to hold, but with all of these problems in his position, then something's got to give. So therefore, after king e4, knight takes h4 was played. bishop c3, and now knight h to g6. But the problem is that now one of the big benefits is that ability of the bishops to create very deadly pins. Of course, the knights can create deadly forks, but those are easier to avoid than the white bishop pins here on the knight, since the forks are just, you avoid them through tactical alertness. But in this case, if black didn't walk into this fork after king e4, if he didn't chop the pawn and walk into this, then, you know, we already saw that a move like knight d7 wouldn't save him anyway, because there would be other problems, right? So, such as bishop to c3 coming in the next move, and after you step away, then bishop c3, king e7, and some other concrete problem, right? So those pins are very, very problematic for the side defending with the knights. Knight takes h4, bishop c3, knight h g6, and bishop to d4 was played. In fact, the best move in this position is king d5, and after knight e7 check, simply king d6, with the rather blunt plan of just cutting through the black position and just going after those pawns and being confident that the bishop pair can hold off this pawn on h3 very easily. So bishop to d5, and once again we see the same pattern. The promotion square is being controlled by the bishop, but also white's promotion square is being eyed up by the bishop just in case. So this would have been the easiest route to victory, but a similar route was achieved. Bishop to d4, h5, bishop takes b6. Finally a pawn drops, but white was actually temporarily down a pawn, so it's still level material. However, after knight d7, bishop d4 check, king e7, a5, we see that black's pawn is far less threatening than white's potential passed pawn, not to mention that besides just a single passed pawn, it may be possible for white to collect this pawn and still keep two connected passed pawns. h4, bishop d5 is what is done. h3, bishop takes b7. Notice how white is okay with even allowing the pawn to the 7th rank, because he will move the king and be controlling that square. King went to d6 instead, bishop g1. Now the pawn is not even able to move. Knight c5 check. And, well, this is the moment where you ask yourself, did I just blunder here? Because if, for instance, bishop takes c5, king takes c5, then in fact this is a draw, because after a6, h2, king e3, black has to move king to b6, and this is exactly what you want to avoid, a situation where your pawns are on the same color as your bishop, because they can be very effectively blockaded on the opposing color. So, well, of course Korchnoi was not going to blunder that, and he had anticipated it and played the move king to f3. And this is where, in the first place, we talked about knowing your king and pawn endgames being very important in one variation. And here we see knowing your knight versus pawn endgames is also quite important. Because after the move king to f3, the point is that black cannot take the bishop on b7, because a6 is a well-known motif, which is that the knight, when placed on b7, is considered, I don't recall if it's called a dumb knight or a knight on a dumb square. I don't know if b7 is the dumb square or the b7 knight is the dumb knight. But in either case, the point is that in this position, even if we scrapped everything else from this board, if we took away the pawn, the knight, this pawn, and this bishop, if everything was just wiped off the board, you can try it yourself if you wish, this would actually be a win for white. Whereas if you could take away the knight, such that all you were left with on the board is this pawn and this king, and it was black to play, he would go king c7, then white would push the pawn, king b7. He gets there in time and it's a draw, it's a theoretical draw. But with the knight there, it's, you know, black wishes he didn't have it, right? So this is a well-known idea. I won't elaborate on it further. It's not really what we're here to discuss, but it's important enough that I wanted to just mention it. So king f3, knight e5 check, king g3. The bishop is not accepted, but after king g3, h2, king takes h2, black realizes, well, if I don't take the bishop, white is keeping that bishop pair and will push the pawn. I mean, let's say that I play king to c7, then if white wishes to, he can play the move a6. And the point is that after knight takes b7, still a7. And we get that same situation that I was speaking of a second ago, where the king wishes it could go to b7. If not for that knight on b7, then I believe it would be a draw. So therefore, after king takes h2, knight takes b7 was played anyway. But after a6, knight f3, one final check, king h1, and Korchnoi's opponent, Alexander Matanovich, resigned. The pawns cannot be stopped. There's no sense in continuing. I think this was really a very beautiful, instructive game. I hope that you agreed. And I hope not to spoil our examination of these two classics with an examination of a game from a chess peasant like myself, but it contains some very, very nice, instructive ideas. And for that reason, we will finish off this section with a look at a personal game of mine that, at least this way, I have the benefit of being able to discuss with you my specific thought process. So that's hopefully will make up for the fact that it is, of course, a much lower quality game than games played by the likes of Korchnoi, Floor, and Botvinnik. So I will see you in a second for the third and final game in this section on utilizing the two bishop advantage. See you there.